Good morning. I hope everyone's well, and I think we'll just give it another minute to see who else joins the event today with Unibuddy. Well, hopefully that's enough time that people have had a chance to join. Thank you for attending the event. My name's Liz from Uni Direct. We work a lot with students, and we're all aware that at the moment, with the ongoing COVID crisis, there's still a lot of uncertainty with students about many things, how they will travel, how they will make their decisions about what university to go to. So I think this is really a very interesting concept to look at, how events are marketed over the next year. And at this point, I can see firsthand from the inquiries we get at Uni Direct, the uncertainty that students have, and the fact that they have lots of questions that they need answers to. And quite simply at the moment, they're not sure how they're going to get the answers. And this is where I'm going to hand over to Unibuddy to discuss hybrid sort of recruitment events. So Jack and Camille, I'll let you take over now and give the presentation to people.
Awesome. Thank you, Liz. So before we crack on, just a quick introduction. My name's Jack Craig and I'm a partnerships manager at Unibuddy. And my role is focused on building new relationships with universities. So I'm involved at the very beginning of the relationship that Unibuddy has with our university partners. Prior to Unibuddy, my background was also in higher education. I spent about 10 years of my career working at universities across the UK in a variety of roles, both in student recruitment, but also program delivery and experiential learning. I'm just going to hand over to you, Camille, just to give a quick introduction to yourself and your role at Unibuddy.
Thanks, Jack. So my name's Camille. I'm a senior customer success manager at Unibuddy. So like Jack, I work with all our university partners, but I take over the relationships once Jack's introduced a new university to Unibuddy, and I'm kind of acting as their main point of contact. What I do is share best practice and just make sure that all our partners are really getting the benefit from the Unibuddy platform and are feeling confident and good about what they're doing with the platform, the results they're seeing, and yeah, acting as a main point of contact and supporting universities and using our platform.
Thank you, Camille. And Camille's underplaying it here. The reason why she's involved is when we're talking, and part of this will be talking some practical takeaways about delivering hybrid events. And Camille's got fantastic experience working with our university partners to deliver successful hybrid events. So before we kind of work through the agenda in more detail, just some housekeeping. If you want to submit a question, please use the Q&A function on Zoom. We are going to save some time at the end of the session to work through those, but if you want to ask a question during the session, please do. You can also interact with us via the chat function on Zoom. And also, the recording of the session will be available. So towards the end of this week, early next week, we will circulate a copy of the recording for yourself and maybe any colleagues who missed the session who you thought this would be of interest to. So quick run through on the agenda. I'm going to start by giving a quick introduction to Unibuddy. So just a little bit of context about who we are, what we do, and kind of why we exist, and some of the partners that we're currently working with. I'm going to also share some data points about how the last 12 to 18 months have impacted students, both in terms of their decision making, but also their behaviors, how they're interacting with each other and universities. I'll then hand over to Camille, and she's going to sort of dig a bit deeper into the area of hybrid events. So what you'll see is that, and probably have experienced, is that over the last 12 to 18 months, you've become a lot more dependent on using online events. So we'll be talking about kind of some of the best practice we've seen through our partners, and also kind of where we see this going as we return to normality and begin to increase the amount of in-campus, on-campus events that universities are running. And then finally, we'll kind of summarize some of the key takeaways of the session. And if we have time and there's audience appetite, we'll work through some questions from the audience. So, quick introduction to Unibuddy. We were actually founded based on the experiences of a prospective international student. So our founder, Diego Fanara, about 5 years ago, was researching and applying for master's courses across Europe and the US. And he found that what really drove his decision-making was the conversations and the feedback he was receiving from his peers. So his colleagues, his friends, his wider network. It was those conversations that drove his decision-making and led him to study at Imperial College. Based on that experience, he felt that one, not every student was lucky to have the sort of extensive network that he had, but also that it's kind of limited the kind of decision making and where he could kind of reach out to. So he felt that there was an opportunity to enable every university to really easily connect prospective students to their current student community and ensure that this is as easy and seamless as possible, and that students can really get these authentic insights into the universities that they're researching. So at its heart, we're really about helping students choose the right university for them. In terms of from a university's perspective, what we're doing is making this as seamless as possible. If you don't have a platform such as Unibuddy, students will often be dependent on social media, their existing network, or peer review sites. And there's no real way for universities to, one, kind of find out who is reaching out to them, so that they can then sort of follow up and nurture these leads. But also there's no kind of guarantee in kind of the quality of service and experience they're getting. If they're reaching out to someone on social media, are they getting a response? Are they getting an accurate response? Are they getting a friendly response from this person? So this allows universities to connect their prospective students with their best student advocates. And we can talk a little bit more about how that works in a moment. But in terms of as a company, 5 years on, we work with close to 500 universities across 40 different countries and 5 different continents. So far, 700,000 prospective students have registered and asked questions on the platform, sending over 11 million messages. So when discussing this need to reassure and support prospective students, and that's a big theme of this this webinar, especially looking at how you can do that over the sort of period of uncertainty that they've experienced and are still experiencing. I think it's useful to provide some context on how the implementation of widespread social distancing has impacted the behaviors of prospective students. So the data points on this slide relate to Generation Z and how they're communicating with each other and also consuming content and media. And since social distancing was introduced in March last year, prospective students are spending 82% more time on their smartphone, 58% more time on social media, and 62% more time on messaging services such as text and WhatsApp. So if we're thinking about this through the lens of student recruitment, it's important to consider whether you're kind of sufficiently adjusting the time and resources that you're allocating to these channels and acknowledging the substantial shift in prospect behavior. Essentially, what are you doing to reach and reassure these prospects through these specific channels? I mean, I think for most attendees, that data won't be hugely surprising. The trends of increased social media and smartphone usage are not new trends. They've been on an upwards trajectory since before COVID. The pandemic has really just accelerated these trends. And at Unibuddy, a key part of what we're doing is helping universities to achieve meaningful, authentic connections with their prospects through the channels they are using the most. And I think even without a platform such as Unibuddy, I think one initial takeaway is, what are you doing to reach students on those channels and communicate with them on the channels they use the most? But the stats on this slide illustrate that there's a reason why at Unibuddy we're placing so much emphasis on the role of the student voice in attracting and recruiting students. 84% of prospective students use social media as part of their research when deciding where to apply. 87% of student decisions, where they're going to accept an offer and enroll, are influenced by personalized communication with the university. And according to QS, in their recent student survey, 74% of prospective students would rather speak to a current student than a staff member when researching their study destination. So there's certain information that is much more powerful and authentic when coming from a current student who shares a similar profile to their own. So not all questions can or should be answered by staff members. So what this means is not only should you be reaching students in the channels that they're using the most, but also engaging with them with meaningful and authentic interactions and content. And ideally, you're meeting this need that they have for kind of peer validation and social proof that prospective students have when making what's a very important decision about where they're going to study their degree. So as that sort of QS survey indicates, the majority of your prospects will be seeking feedback from current students or recent alumni at the universities they are researching. And this feedback, as I mentioned earlier, is typically coming through their existing network, social media, or peer review sites. So as a university, it's about thinking, how can we provide channels for them to have these peer-to-peer interactions? And one of those big ways of doing that are through your events and through open days. But outside of that, and we can talk about that in a moment later on when Camille talks about hybrid events, but we also help partners manage that outside of the big, large-scale events, because what our platform does is it enables prospective students connect directly with student ambassadors without that need to have an existing connection to the school or to take the plunge and reach out to a stranger on social media. So from a university's perspective, you can ensure that your prospects are connecting with your best student advocates and that they're receiving a prompt and accurate response. The main chat platform is embedded on the university website, and prospects can search ambassadors according to their course, nationality, degree level, campus, whatever fits for their university. The format of the conversation is very similar to a WhatsApp or text chat, with ambassadors, receiving notifications and then responding to the prospect via an app on their phone, with the expectation that they will send their response in under 24 hours. What we see with our university partners is that prospective students often find the option of chatting to a student more compelling than some of the more common calls to action, such as requesting a prospectus or requesting more information via a static form. So, and in some cases, they're getting as many times as click-throughs on a chat to a student call to action compared to, say, request a prospectus. And I think a takeaway of that is that it's indicating that prospects really want to have these authentic interactions, not just in person, but also online, and having these online interactions with real students at the universities they're researching. So as this is a key kind of theme of the webinar, as well as a chat platform, our partners can also host live video events through Unibuddy. Unibuddy Live has been designed specifically for higher education, so it has some additional functionality compared to standard streaming platforms. This includes direct messaging, breakout channels, and sort of clearly defined attendee roles for prospects, student ambassadors, and staffs. And this means, and this is a really important part of where we're seeing online events work really well, it's that an online event shouldn't just be a way of sharing content, but also a way of facilitating prospects having more personal conversations and interactions with staff, students, and each other during these events. And Camille can talk about some of the best practice in that in a bit more detail in a moment. So before we do that and take a closer look at hybrid events, just thought it was important to emphasize the impact, so that if you are enabling and encouraging these peer-to-peer connections on your website or through your online events or social media, then you will see an impact, and not just in terms of generating more leads, but at every stage of the recruitment process. So just to talk you through the stats on this slide, at Imperial College Business School, 47% of prospects who have a chat with a current student via the platform go on to submit an application. We conducted a case study with Middlesex, and 54% of their offer holders who had a chat with current students, accepted their offer, and even up until the point of enrolment, we see an impact. So at St John's, their yield increased by 12% when comparing students who chatted on Unibuddy compared to non-users. And at Erasmus School of Economics, that increase on the institutional average was 30%. So 90% of users who were holding an offer and chatted to a current student went on to enroll. So I'm now going to hand over to Camille, and Camille is going to talk a little bit more detail about online and hybrid events.
Thanks, Jack. So as Jack's just mentioned, I'm just going to spend the next part of the webinar going through some best practice and some top tips that we've seen emerge over the past 18 months from some of the universities we work with. We've really seen them transition into a world of online only events and adapted to the disruptions that we've all faced from the past 18 months. But before we do that, let's just quickly dive into what we've seen happen across the Unibuddy platform. Obviously, we've seen a wide range of events taking place, and we've got some clear stats really highlighting the fact that student engagement has really boomed over the last 18 months on the Unibuddy platform. So as you can see from the first two stats, prospective students are having more conversations on the platform. There's been a real increase in the number of unique conversations taking place on Unibuddy. And they're not just having conversations with, obviously having conversations with current students, but also with staff members, members of the recruitment and admissions team, faculty members, the services team, all staff members that are represented on Unibuddy. An even bigger increase, however, as you can see from this slide, really is that there's been an explosion, if we may say, of the usage of our live events feature that Jack has just shown you with those kind of screenshots from the previous slides. And now, having hosted over 8,000 events on Unibuddy, I'm going to just share a few best practices and a few tips as well that we've seen work well for hybrid and online events. Thanks for the smooth transition of slides as well, Jack. So firstly, in terms of best practice for hybrid events, the first thing really to consider is to just make sure that no prospective student is left out by your event schedule. So how really can you do that? Well, having a hybrid event kind of structure or a strategy means that you can really democratize that access to information that you're sharing for prospective students, and make sure that you're catering for all your audiences, the various audiences you have across the world, and also from different backgrounds. So an increased personalization, tailored content and accessibility of your events really should be at the heart of all your planning, your research and your kind of events building, whether that be engaging with students online, in person, or even a mixture of both. So by thinking first about personalization and accessibility when you're planning your events, you can really ensure that no prospective student is left out of your schedule and that you're constantly providing easy and friendly access to information for them. And there's a few ways that this hybrid event structure will allow you to do that. Obviously, firstly, you'll be giving prospective students the chance to attend highly tailored and really targeted sessions that are really personal to them, and they can join. Oh, Jack, I think you've skipped too quickly. If you could go back to the previous slide. Oh, just give him a second. Perfect, thank you. So yeah, giving those prospective students the chance to attend a highly tailored and really targeted session when suits them best, when they feel like joining. You're also giving them the opportunity to easily find and speak to a student from their course of interest or even their country of origin, and trying to make sure that all prospective students can find real representation in your student body and in your ambassadors. It also allows prospective students to attend events from anywhere in the world, and such removing any possible barrier to entry to your events. And finally, they'll give prospective students the ability to attend an event when suits them best. And even if they want to, go back to that event, keep going back, and really have an open-ended access to information you've shared, and allowing them to fully digest that information in their own time. Secondly, hybrid events really keep you adaptable. So of course you can be much more flexible and creative with online and hybrid events. And as obviously we all are very aware, this year there are still very many uncertainties, and the challenges are very different to last year where the choice was only to put on online events. So by making sure you're planning for both digital and in-person events this year, for the rest of the year, this will allow you to keep adapting your strategy as things change, certain things open up and evolve, and also with that very short notice. obviously hybrid event planning makes you much more responsive to external and unpredictable events that we've all seen from the current pandemic. So for example, a real practical example of that could be that certain aspects of your event strategy, let's say such as small campus tours, where you've got one student ambassador guiding a group of prospective students, this will probably be much more likely to return to in-person much earlier on than those bigger scale, full open day campuses, on-campus events. And so by having that hybrid approach, you can make sure that you're making those changes quickly, as soon as and when is possible, really, and keep adapting. And finally, throughout all this, I think the third thing to consider and to really bear in mind is there's always the bigger picture. So as we evolve through the pandemic, I think we've all come to see the clear benefits that an online event can bring with the increased accessibility and the more personalized experience these events can bring for prospective students. So digital events are no longer considered to be the worst or the poor alternative to an in-person event and engagement. And so by sticking to a hybrid strategy, this will allow you to really make the best of both. So it will allow you to have your digital events and also your in-person events equal in priority when you're organizing your events and also budgeting for your events and allocating resource for your events. And this, as I mentioned, will allow you to make the best of both and keep catering for all your prospective students and their different needs, as you have done over the past year. So if we could go to the next slide now, please. Here are our 3 top tips. So how to put all of this in place. Really, we obviously see the best practice, but practically, how can you put this in place whilst you're organizing your virtual events? So number 1, keep your events small and targeted. As I've already kind of mentioned, online events really do give you that opportunity to increase the accessibility of your events, making sure no one's left out, increase that personalization of the event experience as well. So to allow you to do this, it really is a good idea to keep your events relatively small scale, so you can really make the most and really of that accessibility and personalizing the content to all your attendees. And it's quite interesting actually, because at the start of the pandemic, I think we saw many online events were put on trying to really replicate that experience of big on-campus open days, just recreating what was known to work well on campus and trying to do that again online. But really what we've seen over the past 18 months as those months have progressed and we've kind of evolved through the pandemic is that the most effective online strategies for events are actually those that aren't just trying to replicate and repurpose an online, an in-person open day, but just simply online, but it's actually those events that have taken full advantage of the benefits virtual can offer, by really ensuring that their events are tailored, accessible to all the prospects they may have, and also all the different needs they may have. And actually what we've seen is that those smaller scale, more targeted events, for example, focus on a particular course or a particular topic of interest, really are the most impactful for prospective students who are taking part. And the other benefit of it is also that it's much easier for universities to manage than a big open day. So actually, it's just a win situation for everyone involved. Tip number 2, make sure you're getting representation from the whole university. So really thinking about all the different teams, all the departments involved and faculties, but, really as you would for an in-person event. So ensure you've got also student ambassadors on hand, and those ambassadors that are taking part, make sure that they're really from a wide range of courses, nationalities and backgrounds. Again, playing into that idea that you want to make sure that all your prospective students really feel represented by your student body. And finally, tip number 3. So this is really keep anticipating the concerns of your students, your prospective students, beyond simply, and this is quite a big ask, I know, but beyond the current pandemic crisis. Obviously, they're still a future student. They still have all the same worries and concerns that come about with deciding which university to go to. And those worries haven't just disappeared since COVID started. So prospective students are still needing the usual practical information from your university, and they want it in very digestible and accessible formats. So ensuring that your events cater to a variety of topics and interests beyond, just the topic of coronavirus, which obviously takes over, understandably, will also allow your students to fully engage with your university, your ambassadors and staff members, and also really get that sense of what it might be like to study at your university. Next slide, please, Jack. So finally, I think we just wanted to end this whole section on a stat from a 2021 UCAS study because I think it speaks a lot. But of course, over the past year, we've seen that virtual events mean more accessibility for international students. It's a no-brainer, really. They can attend any event without having to leave their front door, let alone travel abroad. So of course, suddenly you've increased that reach and included international students from all over the world. But something that's also happening much closer to home. So virtual events and peer-to-peer platforms have also given students from disadvantaged backgrounds a real increase in access to information, university staff members and also current students, and in a way that's really friendly to them and in tune with how they like to communicate. So virtual events have meant that prospective students from any background, in particular the disadvantaged backgrounds, have been able to attend events and open days without having to take on any unnecessary travel costs. They've not had to plan, take a day off from work or other responsibilities they may have. And in fact, as highlighted by this slide from the UCAS study, it's shown an increase in 8% of 18-year-olds from the most disadvantaged backgrounds across the UK being accepted into university last year. And the increased engagement with these groups across the whole recruitment cycle has been cited as a real contributing factor to this increase in acceptance rates. So when you're planning and thinking about your hybrid events, please do take that into account and take into account the benefits that the increased accessibility can have, obviously for your international students and the international audience, but also for your domestic students much closer to home. So that's it from me. Thanks for listening. And I'll hand back over to Jack now to wrap things up. Oh, Jack, you're on mute.
So thanks, Camille. So just in terms of, before we kind of open up for questions, and if you do have questions, start typing them now. But just to summarize, what we see is kind of the key takeaways from the last kind of 30 minutes. I think you can't stress enough, hybrid events should leverage the unique benefits of a digital format. And that came across really loud and clear from Camille. This isn't about just moving your in-person events online, but really leveraging the benefits you have in accessibility to deliver really impactful events. And on that note, virtual events aren't just beneficial to international students who can't travel. There's benefits for domestic audience as well. So when looking at hybrid events at Unibuddy, we see them as being here to stay, not just for an international audience, but for a domestic audience as well. Going back to earlier in the session, the data shows, your current students are your most powerful advocates. 74% of students will be expecting to kind of reach out and chat with current students during the recruitment process. So please ensure that you're making those opportunities for peer-to-peer interactions as easy and as available as possible. And on a similar note, personalized engagement with your prospects is what drives conversion at every stage of the recruitment process. So I often see universities being really, spending so much time on curating and disseminating amazing content, and that's important. But as the stat shows, 87% of students, their decision making is actually informed by personal interactions they've had with the university, not just the content they're consuming. So how are you facilitating those impactful, meaningful connections with your students? So just to sort of now hand off onto questions, a question for Camille about events. So obviously outside of the Showpiece Open Days, have you seen any examples of smaller scale events? What type of smaller scale events are our partners using and maybe on Unibuddy Live, and what works really well?
Good question, Jack. I think those that, as I touched on, and those that are really targeted on, I think what works well is having a course-based approach. So, really making an intimate experience for those prospective students, so they're meeting other students who are potentially going to be taking part on their course. You can do that on the wider department level, or actually per subject area, depending on how big your department or faculty is. But then you can have the relevant faculty member from that subject area, the ambassador studying that course, and really everyone to do with that program involved. And yeah, I think the kind of more intimate and the more targeted the event, the better engagement you get. Students actually want to take part, want to ask questions, rather than being sucked into a big event across the whole university, which obviously is great in other ways, but I think can feel very overwhelming, and maybe you'll be less likely to actually take part and contribute. So yeah, course-based works really well. Putting faculty Q&As on Unibuddy Live has worked really well. So a lot of faculty members aren't always keen to type. That's how students want to communicate, typing and asking questions, quickly via mobile app. Probably not really the way faculty members want to work. So actually having the possibility of having a faculty member on Unibuddy Live through the video streaming and students asking them questions via the chat, that's worked really nicely. And the good thing is once the faculty members got their staff profile, they can just keep being invited to an event, keep taking part, and not have to worry about creating an account each time. So just getting them set up in the system, and then once they're in, they can be invited to all sorts of events.
Thanks, Camille. And just to build on that, I think this idea of sort of smaller course-based events can be really impactful later in the recruitment process as well. So when you maybe have a group of offer holders and you're inviting them to an event, for them to have the opportunity to interact with each other is really important. If you think about a business school environment where top candidates may be entertaining multiple offers from different schools, one of the deal breakers will be, what are my classmates like? What's the caliber of the students I'm going to be potentially in a study group with? And giving them that opportunity to interact with them through these structured events can be an incredibly powerful conversion tool as well. So
definitely,
I think that might be us now. I think we've kind of haven't got any more questions to work through. So what I'm going to do now is kind of thank everyone for attending, and thank obviously Camille and Liz for joining us today, and for Liz for helping coordinate this session. If you are interested in learning more about Unibuddy, please feel free to reach out to Liz, especially if you have an existing relationship with her, and obviously I'll put her email on the slide for reference. But also if you have any questions about Unibuddy, you can also reach out to me or Camille via email. So that's it for us. Thank you for everyone for attending, and I guess goodbye from me, Camille and Liz.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Jack and Camille.